Welcome to Someday is Here, the place where we get real about life, relationships, mental health, and what it means to keep fighting your way back to yourself. I'm your host, Michelle Kramer, and I'm so glad you're here. I finally, and I'm so excited to share that I have a copy of my book, Just Unfinished, in my hands for the first time. There is something so amazing about seeing something that you have had in front of you on a computer screen for almost a year, that you've spent hundreds of hours working through and working with other people to bring to life. And then there's that moment when you open the package and you get to hold your first proof of the book. And it is an incredible feeling. I just don't know how else to explain it. I know we've talked a lot about writing the book, but I really haven't spent a lot of time inviting you into the book yet. And I actually spent a lot of time over the last few days, and I went through and I reread it again and highlighted some of my favorite passages and things that still make me tear up a little bit or think about my life reflectively again. And so I think I'm going to share a little bit of that with you today. All right. Sorry, I feel like I'm like super excited and my brain's going 50 different directions, but bear with me. All right, so today I'm going to share a couple of the passages with you. Not simply a preview, but so that you get to hear what's inside it. And also, maybe that I could talk a little bit more about writing and sitting with some of these moments from life have taught me. I did not write this book because I feel like I've had this extraordinary life that, I need to share with people. I spent a lot of years questioning whether my story was even really worth telling. I didn't know if anyone would care. But then I realized, maybe that's not the point. So much of my life has been spent wondering if I was enough, interesting enough, successful enough, good enough. And I also spent so many years thinking that I was the only one who struggled with the things I struggled with, who felt guilty for wanting to be more than just a mom, who felt like my life was partially over and that there wasn't much left that I could accomplish or do because I was nearing those dreaded 40s. But the book, in its own way, became a way of saying, maybe I'm not the only one. I wrote this book because I felt called to write it. Not because I wanted to be an author, not because I want to write a million books, but more because I just wanted other people to know that they're not alone. And I used my story as hopefully a catalyst for others to sit with their own. And in each chapter, there's a moment of insight where I talk about what I learned from that season of my life. There are reflection questions for the reader to sit with and turn introspectively onto their own lives and their own stories. And those are, you could journal them out, you could just sit with them, you could do one a day and have many for a long period of time. You get to work through them however you want, or not look at them at all if that's not your thing. And then there is also a tool from the therapy room. And so that is something that I have incorporated either as a lesson I've learned through being in therapy myself or from being a therapist. Just different insights into things that I think might be able to help based on what that chapter was talking about. So this book is as much for me and my family and a love story as it is a way to bring community and connection to others. And I really hope you enjoy it. But this brings me all the way back to the 18-year-old girl who had absolutely no idea where her life was about to go. The drive to the store felt like I was moving through a dream, just doing the next logical thing, with anxiety leading the way. I stood in the aisle, staring at too many options for someone operating on autopilot. I grabbed the one that looked right, hid it under my shirt, and I walked to the cashier and brought some candy alongside it, because I needed something to hold on to. I scanned the area, making sure no one I knew was around. I felt embarrassed and terrified all at once. I remember trying to be quiet because my mom was home. I remember standing there and just staring at the stick, holding back my tears. The waiting felt like years instead of minutes. And then, 2 pink lines. I slipped the test back into the packaging, tucked it back under my shirt, and walked silently to my bedroom. I stood in the middle of that room with the purple walls and the yellow and lime green handprints along the border. I stared at my Aladdin bed sheets and thought, how could I be a mom? Those sheets were a reminder of the little girl I still was, and I could feel the innocence of that being pulled away from me. The pile of stuffed animals on my bed stared back. Clothes and empty CD cases littered the floor. I sank into those Aladdin sheets, and I cried for the girl I had just been that morning, the one who did not yet know how much was about to change. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. I remember feeling incredibly nervous. I'm truly terrified. I remember feeling guilty. And I remember carrying a lot of shame, because no one would have expected that of me. And I think the funny thing about being 18 is that you think you know it all. You've got it all figured out. You are an adult. You can handle anything. But now, looking back, thinking about my own children who are 24, 19, and 17, and I realize how young 18 really is. How ill prepared you are in so many ways for the world that you exist in. When I think about that young girl standing in her bedroom, and I picture her scared, feeling really alone in that moment, I just want to wrap my arms around her and tell her that she is loved and she is worthy and there is nothing to feel shame about. Some of the scariest moments were thinking about having to tell other people. Telling Sean. I was afraid that man was going to walk away. And not because he had ever given any indication that that's who he was or the kind of man he was, but just because, as I've talked about so many times, I always thought I was never enough. And so I thought something like this, for sure, he was gonna walk away. And then telling my mom, and My mom and I back then had such a complex relationship, and I didn't know how she would feel telling my grandma. That was a hard one. And I actually didn't write about it in the book. That woman is so full, she was so full of love and grace and kindness. And then telling my mother-in-law. I let Sean do that. I think the interesting thing about being a teen mom is that in some ways you're just like so young that you just don't know any better. And what I mean by that is, I think, when I had the second and the third kid, like, a little bit later in my 20s, I feel like I had a little bit more of life figured out. But there's like this bravery and this confidence that comes from being young, from your prefrontal cortex not being fully developed, where you just kind of feel like you could just kind of jump and you're going to figure it out, on the landing. And I think that's kind of just what I did. I took this as okay, this is where I'm at, this is what's going on, and we're just going to jump and we're going to do our best, and we're going to make it work. And that was my attitude. And 43-year-old me, if I can go back to 18-year-old me and sit with her on those Aladdin sheets, I would tell her that it's okay to put herself first sometimes. That she doesn't have to be a perfect, curated version of a good mom all the time. She doesn't have to feel guilt or shame because she didn't do it the right way. That she gets to be proud of who she is and what she accomplished. That she's going to screw up more times than she can count. But she is going to love that baby and her life fiercely. It is going to be hard. It is going to be really hard sometimes. But she is going to make it through it. And she's going to be stronger and better because of it. So when our oldest was born, it was not a super easy delivery. I had been induced, I think, 3 times. So they had taken me to the hospital, given me Pitocin, put me on all the monitors, had me spend the night, sent me home. Brought me back, did the same thing, sent me home. And so finally, on the 3rd induction, it worked. They were able to get to the point of breaking my water. And I remember I was in labor forever. Or it felt that way anyways. It was like 17 or 18 hours. And we got to the point where I was finally able to start pushing. And I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed for hours. And they got to the point where they thought the baby's head was just stuck in my pelvic bone. So there really wasn't much they were going to be able to do. And the baby's heart rate started to get a little erratic. And so they opted for me to go have a C-section. And so what I had pictured going one way ended up going a completely different way. And it was absolutely terrifying. And I definitely talk about that in the book. But then I remember the moment I got to see my baby for the first time. And it was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. And then I promptly passed out. And when I came back to later, it was late in the evening and everybody was getting ready to leave. And so it was just me and this tiny little person in the room in the middle of the night. Late that night, I found myself alone with the baby for the first time. Sean had gone home to sleep before his morning classes. It was just the 2 of us in that quiet hospital room. And in that stillness, something shifted permanently inside me. I made a promise out loud to that tiny person. I would not become another teen statistic. I would build them a life full of love, stability, and courage. A life different from the one I had known. What I did not realize in that late night whisper was how much that promise would cost me, carry me, and ultimately shape everything that came next. And the promise I made in that hospital room, it was beautiful and fierce and necessary. But promises made from fear, even loving ones, can be cages if we are not careful. It would take me a long time to understand the difference between keeping a promise and losing yourself inside of one. At that time, that promise was beautiful. I wanted this baby to have stability. I wanted to be a good mother. I was determined not to be the stereotype people expected of a teen mom. And that determination truly became part of my identity. Somewhere along the way, I'll give my children everything began to include pieces of myself that probably actually didn't need to be made as sacrifice. And that statement, promises made from fear, even loving ones, can become cages if we are not careful. When I wrote that, I sat with that for a long time. Because I think, how often do we do that as humans, as mothers, as partners, as daughters? How often do we make promises that later become cages that we feel trapped in? We made them with the best of intentions, but we lost ourselves along the way. Some of the promises that we could make might look like, I'm never going to need anyone. I'm always going to keep everyone happy. I'll never let my children know what I felt. I'll prove everyone wrong. I'll take care of everybody else. Any of those sound familiar to you? So moving forward in the book, a few years later, as we were, building our family, building our lives, I had so many moments where I felt like all I was just a mom. And at the time, I didn't see the beauty in that. Because it is beautiful. Being a mom is the most amazing and greatest gift I've ever been given. I love my humans more than anything else. But where I got lost was that I never just had to be a mom. But I felt selfish for wanting anything more. I chose motherhood. I loved motherhood. I chose to be home. But all of that did cost me something. So there we were. Sean, student, future medicine career, upstanding employee. Michelle. just a mom. That was how I saw it at the time. And I carried that story about myself for far too long. Just a mom. I said those words about myself for years without realizing how much damage they were doing. The truth is, there is nothing just about motherhood. It is sacred, exhausting, invisible, and some of the most important work a human being can do. But the world rarely treats it in that way. And when you're already carrying a wound that says you are never enough, the silence around your sacrifice only deepens it. What I wish I'd known then is that wanting more for yourself doesn't make you a bad mother. It makes you a human. The guilt I carried for wanting a life beyond my children wasn't a sign that something was wrong with me. It was a sign that I had needs too, and those needs deserved as much attention as everyone else's. You're allowed to love your children wholly and still grieve the parts of yourself that got set aside. Why did I call myself just a mom? I think part of that was, again, going back to just being such a young mom and taking that word and that job as like end all be all of my life so that I never, ever became a statistic. And I held on to it so tightly that I never allowed myself to think of myself as anything else. And it sounds crazy to me now as a 43-year-old woman. But back then, that's just what my brain had latched onto. And it was the story I told myself over and over and over again, that I would be a bad mom if I went out one night and had a drink with a friend. Because what if something happened? I'd be a bad mom if I went and had a full career, because I should be home with my kids. I would be a bad mom if I went on vacation without them, because they should have vacation too. I now hate the phrase just mom, because again, there's so much more to motherhood and there's no just about it. Oh, I think it's so crazy that simultaneously our society tells women that it's the most important job in the world, but then also treating the work that we actually do as parents, as moms specifically, as invisible. We're not paid. We're not given credit. We're just expected to do it, and to do it with a smile, and to love every moment of it. I think it's so easy to confuse having our own needs as a person, and especially in motherhood and in long-term relationships and things like that, with being selfish. And if there's anything I've learned, it's that I am a better mom and a better wife when I am able to do things for myself and to pour into my own cup, if you will. I show up better. I feel more engaged. I'm happier. There is a difference between loving your family and disappearing in your family. You could love your family wholeheartedly with everything and still make time for yourself. It's okay. And if nobody else is going to give you that permission, I am right here, right now. When I look back at my 20s and maybe even into my early 30s, I so badly want to go back and hug that girl and should maybe shake her a little bit and tell her that although she thinks she's doing it all right, she's doing so much wrong. Because by not putting herself first sometimes, by not pouring into herself, by not loving herself enough, she is modeling some not so great things to her children. That when they saw me succeed and do things and be excited about life, that gave them permission to do the same thing. I know she had the best of intentions. But man, did I have to unlearn a lot of things. I don't have to rewrite my history to grow from it. And that's what I learned, especially in sitting and writing this book. I loved that life. And there are still things I wish I had done differently. What I found while writing the book, I had found these really interesting correlations and connections between different periods of my life that I didn't recognize before. So thoughts that maybe started in my 19, 20-year-old that later resurfaced in the, mid-30s, or responses to and reactions from that scared girl that would show up later when she felt like someone was going to abandon her, or if she felt unseen. Some of the things I had maybe labeled as my personality traits, I have found really were coping strategies and safety. Those kind of reactions, those blocks, those, tendencies to pull away. That's what I learned to keep myself safe. When I wrote this book, I developed a sense of compassion for the version of myself that maybe I had judged so harshly. I realized that understanding why you did something isn't the same as excusing everything you've done. And when I wrote this book, I really did try to hold a mirror to my life. And I tried to be as truthful and as honest as I could in writing it. I think I learned that I could look at myself honestly without making myself neither a hero or a villain. I didn't write this book because I have everything figured out. I promise you, I don't. I am still unfinished. This book is just literally a snapshot of what I understand now. And probably 5 years from now, I'm gonna understand, parts of my story even differently from where I do now. But that's kind of the point of being unfinished, is that we're still learning, we're still growing, we're still evolving. So I'd love to ask you, what's a story about yourself that you have been carrying for so long that you've stopped actually asking whether it's true? Maybe it's just, I'm too much. I have too much personality. I'm too emotional. Maybe it's, I'm just a mom. Maybe it's, I'm the responsible one who has to take care of everyone. Maybe it's, I can't disappoint anyone or let anyone down. Maybe it's, I'm behind and I should have done more and I should be doing more. Maybe it's, I've screwed everything up. Maybe it's, everyone else has it all figured out and I don't. I just want you to take a moment and sit with that. Where did that story that you've been telling yourself come from? Was it from an interaction with someone in your family? Was it from an event that happened with friends or in your community? Was it from a TikTok you saw that made you question everything in your own life? Where did it come from? And then I want you to ask yourself, does it still deserve as much power as you're giving it? So, Just Unfinished comes out in September. And what you've heard is just a tiny portion today of me reading a couple of the excerpts from it. You can learn more by going to michellekramer.com. I believe there is now a pre-sale on the e-reader version of it, but the print copy will be released on September 22nd. I am so excited to put this in the hands of other people, and also absolutely terrified at the same time, if I'm being real. There's just something really intimidating about putting your best and your worst moments of your life out there for everyone else to read and judge. But one other thing really quickly. If you're on YouTube, you could see the image on the front of my book. That was actually drawn for me by one of my children as a Christmas gift. It was taken from a photo we had before my grandma had gotten sick. And one of my children had drawn this in pencil and framed it for me. And when I was trying to come up with a cover for the book, I kept racking my brain and trying to figure out what I wanted it to look like. And I realized I had walked by this photo or this drawing every single day for the last 8 months. And this was exactly what my cover needed. So just an extra little thing that I am so proud of. All right, before I go, I also want to tell you about the next episode because I'm really looking forward to this conversation. My friend Carrie and colleague is going to be joining us, and she is going to talk about grief and how we show up for people who are hurting. And that includes people who are grieving a death and people who are going through serious illness themselves. We're going to go and get into the well-intentioned things people say that actually aren't helpful. What not to say to someone who is grieving or sick. Why people sometimes pull away when they don't know what to say. What can actually help. And how to simply be with someone when you can't fix what they're going through. I love this topic for the podcast, especially because almost everyone eventually finds themselves on both sides of this situation. Being the person who is hurting and being the person desperately trying to figure out what to say. Truth is, we aren't always going to have the right words. Sometimes there aren't the right words, but we can learn how to show up better. And that's what we're going to talk about next episode. So wherever you are today, whatever season you are in, I hope this reminds you that you don't have to have it all figured out. Maybe you're just unfinished, and unfinished is not the same as done. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. I will see you in the next episode.